Hello, my name is Dean Sebastian, and in this presentation, I'll be talking about my favorite brain part, the hippocampus. Let's begin with an overview. First of all, why is the hippocampus my favorite brain part? The reason for that goes hand in hand with the function of the hippocampus, being the basis for learning and memory. I've always loved learning new things, and I've always been so fascinated in how learning works, all the mechanisms behind it and whatnot. And for that, I have the hippocampus to thank. As for the name hippocampus, it derives from the Greek word hippocampus, meaning seahorse. And as we can see, there's the hippocampus, there's my crudely drawn image of a seahorse. If we turn it over to its side, we can see the two look very similar, so the name makes sense. As for the anatomy of the hippocampus, it's located medial to each hemisphere's ventricle, and it's comprised of two main cortices, the parahippocampal cortex and the renal cortex. These are involved in the input of information. They receive information and send it over to the hippocampus. As for the output of information, that is the function of the fornix. Moving on, there are two main neuron layers of the hippocampus, the Amon's horn and the dentate gyrus. And this diagram depicts more or less the entire anatomy of the hippocampus, everything mentioned in the previous slide. Now let's move on to the juicy stuff. How the hippocampus actually works in learning and memory. But before we talk about that, we need to talk about two very important men, those being Timothy Bliss and Terje Lomo. Here they are pictured. Bliss is on the far left, Lomo is on the far right, and in the middle is their friend Per Anderson, who owned the laboratory that they worked in. In 1973, these two men performed a very important experiment in which they would repeatedly electrically stimulate the hippocampus of rabbits. And it was found that by doing this, the postsynaptic response of the hippocampus increased, or in other words, the synapse strengthened. This process that was observed was coined long-term potentiation by the two, and it is today thought that this is the underlying mechanism behind learning and memory in the hippocampus. A very similar process that also takes place in the hippocampus is long-term depression, in which the strength of the synapse weakens, and it is thought that this is the underlying mechanism behind forgetting. Now that we know how the hippocampus works, let's talk about what happens when it experiences complications. To begin with, we'll discuss the most famous case study involving the hippocampus, that of patient HM. Henry Molaison was a man living in the 1900s who had severe epilepsy and frequently suffered from seizure. In the 50s, he underwent a very controversial surgery in order to help relieve him of this, but unfortunately, the surgery caused severe damage to his hippocampus and resulted in Henry experiencing severe anterograde amnesia and a complete inability to form new memories. This case study is what caused scientists to realize that the hippocampus has an incredibly important effect in memory. Moving on, Alzheimer's. It's been found that for those with Alzheimer's, the hippocampus experiences significant cell loss. As we can see here, there's the brain of a healthy person, there's the brain of someone with severe Alzheimer's. Right about there's the hippocampus. It's a lot smaller due to cell loss. Now this makes a lot of sense, as Alzheimer's is often associated with memory loss, and with the hippocampus being responsible for memory, cell loss in the hippocampus would more than likely result in memory loss. Now something that many would not associate with the hippocampus is depression and stress. However, it's been found that those that suffer from severe depression and stress have a very hard time regenerating cells in certain parts of the hippocampus. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned a lot more about the hippocampus than you knew. Here are all the sources I used. If you would like to learn anything else, anything new, I would very much recommend checking out these sources.